Stand at the corner of Queen and Flinders Streets in Melbourne and look up at the railway lines overhead. Beneath the constant rumble of trains, there's a long row of brick arches that most people barely notice. This is Banana Alley. There are no fruit stalls here now, no market chaos, no sweet smell of ripening bananas. Just a line of weathered 19th century vaults, tucked between Queen Street and King Street, quietly holding a very different story of Melbourne's past. Today, these arches house nightclubs, gyms, studios, offices and small retailers. But they began life as part of a bold piece of railway engineering and as one of the city's most important working waterfronts. Before anyone called it Banana Alley, these were simply the viaduct buildings. In 1891–92, as the new Flinders Street Railway Viaduct was completed, Victorian Railways designed and built 33 brick vaults underneath the elevated tracks. Each vault was a self-contained tenancy, a cool, solid, income-producing storage space directly beneath the busy railway corridor. They sat in the middle of a dense commercial landscape. Just up the hill stood the Western Market, Melbourne's first official fruit and vegetable market. Established in 1841, it took up an entire city block between Market Street, Collins Street, William Street and Flinders Lane. For almost 90 years it was the trading floor for growers, merchants and hawkers. But its cramped sheds and poor ventilation meant traders were always searching for better storage away from the main market. Along the riverbank, the Federation Fish Market rose in 1892. It covered about 5 acres and had everything a modern wholesale market needed: railway access, cold storage and freezing chambers. Fish and game could be unloaded straight from trains into the building. If you walked along Flinders Street then, the smells would have hit you first: river mud, sawdust, fresh fish, ice, tobacco smoke and horse sweat. This was a working waterfront, the pantry of a growing city. Right between these two great markets, pressed against the river and under the tracks, sat the viaduct buildings, those 33 brick vaults, waiting for tenants. In the 1890s, bananas arrived in Victoria almost entirely from far north Queensland. Many plantations there were worked by Chinese growers. In Melbourne, the fruit trade itself was dominated by Chinese merchants, especially those based in and around Little Bourke Street, not far from the Western Market. When the viaduct buildings opened, the railway department leased each vault separately. Early tenants reflected the working waterfront economy: wine and spirit dealers, customs brokers, hardware and rope merchants, warehouse storage, and a small number of produce agents. Among them were banana merchants. They quickly discovered that these brick-lined vaults were perfect for ripening bananas. The archways had cool, shaded interiors, thick brick walls that held a steady temperature. Darkness ideal for turning hard, green fruit into sweet, yellow bananas. Ships unloaded green bunches at Queen's Wharf, just across the road. Workers stacked the stalks on wooden trolleys and wheeled them into the vaults. Inside, the stalks were cut, hung in rows, and left to ripen naturally using ethylene from the fruit itself, long before refrigeration was cheap or common. If you stood here in the 1890s, you would have seen men pushing tall stalks of bananas under the arches. Steam rising from the river in the morning. The heavy sweetness of ripening fruit mixing with the salty smell of fish from the market. Wagons and carts echoing over the bluestone cobbles. Over time, Melburnians stopped calling them the viaduct buildings. They simply said, Banana Alley. To understand why these vaults were built at all, you have to go back a few decades, to when Melbourne was trying to connect its growing suburbs, its goldfields and its port. In 1854, the privately owned Hobson's Bay Railway Company opened Australia's first steam railway, a 4-kilometre line from Flinders Street to Sandridge, now Port Melbourne. The first official suburban steam train left from near the present-day Flinders Street Station on the 12th of September, 1854. By the 1860s, the city's railways had split into two systems. Flinders Street and Princes Bridge stations handled suburban trains from the eastern suburbs. Spencer Street Station, opened in 1858, became the hub for country services to places like Sunbury, and later to the Ballarat and Bendigo goldfields. Flinders Street sat on the north bank of the Yarra. Princes Bridge Station, just across the river, served other suburban lines. They were side by side, but not connected. Passengers had to walk across Princes Bridge to continue their journey. Spencer Street, further west, was a separate government-run terminus. 3 major stations. No proper rail link between them. In 1865, the first real step towards an integrated network came when a ground-level line was built beside Princes Bridge, allowing eastern suburban trains to run directly into Flinders Street. Later, a cutting was excavated near Swanston Street to smooth the approaches into the station. But the jump from suburban to country trains still wasn't solved, because the suburban lines were privately run, and the country lines were controlled by the government. That changed in 1878. The Victorian government bought out the private railway companies and brought everything under one authority, Victorian Railways. For the first time, Melbourne's suburban and country lines were controlled by a single organisation. It suddenly made sense to connect Flinders Street and Spencer Street with a through line. The first version came in 1879, a single-track ground-level tramway along the riverbank, linking the yards at both stations. Trains ran at night to avoid blocking Market, Queen and King Streets. It worked well enough to prove the idea, but it was slow, dangerous and only practical after dark. The real solution would need to be grade separated, a proper elevated viaduct. The 1880s were a boom decade for rail in Victoria. The Railway Construction Act of 1884, often called the Octopus Act, authorised hundreds of kilometres of new lines. Railways, it was believed, would make the colony rich. As part of that push, the government announced in September 1888 that an elevated viaduct would finally connect Flinders Street and Spencer Street on a separate, raised corridor. The project was designed by William Henry Green, Chief Engineer of Victorian Railways, and costed at £73,000. Building a heavy brick and masonry structure right beside the Yarra was not simple. The riverbank here was soft, waterlogged mud. Engineers had to drive deep timber piles down to firmer ground, then build bluestone foundations and brick piers on top. The arches were formed from red bricks laid in a series of Roman-style spans, creating the repeating rhythm we still see today. Work began in 1888 and finished in 1891. On the 23rd of November, 1891, trains crossed the viaduct for the first time. Initially only 2 of the 4 planned tracks were laid, but the design allowed for expansion as traffic grew. Newspapers noted that trains could now run between the 2 stations in around 4 minutes, instead of up to half an hour via the old, indirect routes. Commentators praised the viaduct's strength and durability, and some even pointed out the handy storage spaces formed by its arches. Those arches would soon become the viaduct buildings. And later, Banana Alley. In 1891–92, the City of Melbourne leased the spaces under the viaduct to contractors Smith and Crawford, who completed the 33 vaults in brick and concrete. By the mid-1890s, at least 20 businesses operated beneath the tracks, addressed as 363 to 393 Flinders Street. Tenants included produce and fruit agents, wine and spirit merchants, customs brokers, rope and ironmongery suppliers, banana merchants, warehouse storage for a variety of goods. Outside, the surrounding streets were lined with seamen's boarding houses, lodgings for wharf labourers, taverns and small warehouses. This was not a fashionable address. It was noisy, busy, practical, a working alley that linked rail, river and market. Banana Alley's fortunes rose and fell with the working river and the markets it served. When the Spencer Street Bridge was built between 1928 and 1930, and later the King Street vessels, the vaults lost their advantage as transit storage. At the same time, Melbourne's central markets were shifting. In 1930, the Western Market, which had served the city since 1841, finally lost its role as the main wholesale fruit and vegetable market. Trade moved to upgraded facilities at the Queen Victoria Market. Then, in 1955, the vast Federation Fish Market was relocated to West Melbourne. Its ornate riverside building was demolished in 1956 to make way for car parking ahead of the Olympic Games. With cargo operations moving downstream and wholesale markets shifting to West Melbourne, the entire North Bank along this stretch of the Yarra became less important for trade. In the 1980s, governments began to see potential again in these forgotten spaces. In 1984, the state government under Premier John Cain allocated funds to refurbish the vaults. A further redevelopment in 1987 aimed to turn them into a cultural and tourism precinct. The Victorian Wine Industry Association opened its headquarters and a wine museum here, echoing the days when wine merchants traded under the arches in the 1890s. The idea was clever but short-lived. Foot traffic was still limited and the precinct struggled to attract enough visitors. By 1989, the wine venture had closed. Even so, the vaults had re-entered Melbourne's cultural memory. They appeared on television, most notably in the series Canal Road, where the Arches featured as a fictional district. In the show, cars drove directly into spaces that are, in reality, pedestrian only, highlighting Banana Alley's cinematic appeal. Over time, a new kind of tenant moved in. Nightclubs took advantage of the raw brick interiors and tunnel-like acoustics. Platform 1, in particular, turned several arches into one of Melbourne's most distinctive underground clubs. A gym set up under the tracks, Doherty's Gym City, along with martial arts schools, a barber and smaller businesses. The constant rumble of trains overhead and the curve of the arches became part of the experience. The refurbishment of the vaults coincided with a broader shift along the river. Industrial remnants were removed, and the riverbank slowly evolved from a freight route into a public waterfront. The pedestrian route that became Flinders Walk grew out of these works. Landscaping, new berths for small craft, and improved paths gradually connected the vaults with Queen's Bridge and Spencer Street. What had once been a noisy, industrial alley began to function as a quieter terrace in the middle of the city. As Melbourne's laneway culture flourished in the 1990s and 2000s, people started to see spaces like Banana Alley not as dead ends, but as part of a larger network of hidden, walkable routes. Today, Banana Alley sits within a new vision for the Yarra's North Bank, the City of Melbourne's Green Line project. Green Line is a multi-year plan to transform 4 kilometres of the river's edge, from Barraring to Docklands, into a continuous sequence of parks, promenades and public spaces. Banana Alley forms part of what's known as the Falls Precinct, named after the natural waterfall that once marked the upper limit of the tidal river. For this stretch of river, the Green Line proposals include a reconstructed river edge with ecological planting, floating pontoons for small vessels, a continuous promenade linking Federation Square to Docklands, better pedestrian connections between Flinders Street and the river, more flexible uses for the vaults, especially for hospitality and cultural activities. Any major change here will require coordination between the City of Melbourne and VicTrack, which owns the rail land, along with state and Commonwealth funding. Early Green Line works have begun further upstream at Barraring. The Falls Precinct, including Banana Alley, is expected to follow. Banana Alley hides in plain sight. Its brick arches are a physical reminder of the engineering ambition that turned Melbourne into a railway city. Its name recalls a time when ships unloaded fruit onto the lower Yarra and workers pushed green banana stalks into dark vaults to ripen. Its decline reflects the end of the working waterfront. Its revival mirrors Melbourne's habit of rediscovering and reusing old spaces. Today, trains still cross the viaduct just as they did in 1891. Beneath them, the vaults continue to adapt, From fruit stores and wine merchants to hobby shops, cafes, a pie shop, nightclubs and gyms. Banana Alley is not a museum. It is a living fragment of 19th century infrastructure that still does what it was built to do: carry trains across the city, while the arches below keep finding new roles in Melbourne's story.